So just a disclaimer, I might cry or shed some tears. So just, I know some people get weirded out about people crying. So, um, so I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, and I graduated high school in 2013. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so I decided to go to a community college for about 2 years. But I realized that I had no idea what career I wanted to get into, so I decided to stop going. And I thought my calling was to work for the rest of my life. So I worked with my mom for about a year and a half, but it just felt like God was tugging at my heart that He wasn't done with me yet. So the person who told me about Central, a lot of you guys know her, Abigail Lara. She told me about it, and she just told me that it was a great community and just a great environment, just the professors and things like that. So I decided to take that leap of faith, and I transferred over in spring of 2017. And leaving my family was hard. I come from a very close family, and in the Hispanic culture, it's just normal to live with your parents as an adult. Like, you can be 40 and live with them. It's just normal in our culture. But I know for some, it's just, you gotta, I guess, grow up. So I guess what God was teaching me, just to kind of break that tradition and to move away so I can grow closer with Him. It was hard to leave my family, and the first year I was like really homesick. I think the first week I just like wanted to pack my stuff and just like go back home, but I knew God had me here for a reason. As I look back at my time here, I can share with you guys about the different places that I got to serve in. But if I'm being honest, when I got to Central, I was carrying the sin. Now, I had a relationship with God, but it wasn't intentional. So I was thinking about like kind of sugarcoating the sin, not telling what it is, but I'm just gonna be real and raw about it. So the sin that I was carrying was pornography. Now, a lot of people think that it's just a men, like men only view it, but also women view it as well. Sorry, it's just
Okay.
Oh, hate it. Sorry. So now, during my time here, oh, sorry, just
You're good.
okay. Okay, so now during my time here, I never viewed it as school. It only happened when I would go back home for breaks. When I was here, I felt like I was safe and that my sin couldn't control me here. But I realized that in order for me to be a servant leader, I had to let go of the sin. What I didn't realize that, oh man, okay, that my sin was hindering my relationship with God and people. It felt like I was living two different lifestyles. I had all the shame and guilt that I felt disgusted. I think it was about, I confessed my sin about 8 months ago, and I think it was a deal that we had that Ann came to talk to us about sin. And she told us that if there's anyone that wants to just give that sin away, to just go talk to her. And throughout the years, God was tugging at my heart to really tell somebody and confess about my sin, but I always ignored it. But that night, I felt like the Holy Spirit was present and that I needed to go tell somebody. So I confessed my sin about 8 months ago, and I went to Ann's office. I told her what my sin was, and to my surprise, she didn't turn away from me, but rather told me that she was proud that I confessed. The first thing she told me was to have an accountability partner and to talk to a counselor. So I got help, and to tell you the truth, it felt amazing to confess. My sin was finally coming to the light, and it wasn't in darkness anymore. I honestly thought that I could do it on my own, but I realized that I have an almighty God that is never going to let me go. God has made the sinner holy again, and I am reborn. You can change what's on the outside, but the most important change begins with your heart. This means that you need to check your heart and see what's in there. When you begin to surrender those things, then light shines in your heart. You begin to remove the obstacle that has been hindering your relationship with God. You begin to transform it into the leader that God wants you to be. My encouragement is, if you are dealing with the sin, bring it to light. Tell someone about it. Because if you don't, then it will make the journey harder, as it has done for me. You don't have to do it on your own. We have an almighty God and people at this school that care about you. You will miss many opportunities, but the most important one is having a relationship with God. It's going to be hard to have that community with other people. When I got here, I thought that I had my sin under control and that I could do this on my own. This sin has held me back from a lot of things, but I am free from it. My sin has been buried. That sin remains. All these years I kept on feeding my sin and allowing it to continue growing and growing. But now that I have been set free, it has been buried. I can say that God has restored me and has lifted me from the darkness. Satan comes to steal and destroy, but God comes to restore what is broken. The scripture that comes to mind is found in Romans 6, verses 22 to 23. But now that you have been set free from sin and have become slaves of God, the benefit you reap leads to holiness. And the result is eternal life, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. That's all I have.
Yeah, Evan, you're up next. Jessica, that was courageous. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, mine's not as inspiring, so bear with me. You good?
Whenever you're ready.
So, I'm just going to start by saying how I got to Central, because it's kind of cool in that aspect of just saying yes to God. So I went into a community college my first semester here, or not here, my first semester of college. I was just at a community college. It's called Ivy Tech, for those of you from Indiana, you know about that college. And it just wasn't something I wanted to do. I was doing it just because it was affordable, and then I would go to a more expensive school after I got my gen eds. And like I said, it was just awful. I didn't like where I was at. My friends didn't have the same morals and values as me, and it just wasn't a good time. So I was praying to God, and I was like, God, where do you want me to be? Because I don't think it's here. And a couple of days later, I get a letter from Central, and they're like, hey, based on your SAT scores, we would like you to check out our full tuition scholarship. And like I tell most people, my SAT scores were awful. So I knew something had to be going on. And so I went ahead and looked at Central's website, I applied, and then I got connected with an admissions counselor, and then that next semester, without even taking a campus visit, I just came here. And it was probably one of the best decisions of my life, is coming here and learning and having an affordable degree. But for most of my life, I've known that I wanted to go in ministry. I felt called into ministry at the age of 8, which is pretty early. And I've prided myself in knowing that I am going to do something, like knowing what I wanted to do since I was little. And I always thought it was going to be youth ministry, because I like youth group, I like pizza, I like hanging out with kids my age, but that's not really what youth ministry was. And throughout most of high school and most of my time here, which Lucas is back there shaking his head, that's not what it is. And throughout most of my time here, I thought I was going to be in youth ministry. But here's the thing about God, you don't really know his plan until he tells you. I'd always thought I knew exactly what God wanted me to do, and thought my plan was all figured out. I thought I was one of the few who knew exactly what was going to happen when I got out of high school, and even when I got out of college. I was very wrong, and I eventually found that out. I went to Passion in 2018, and throughout my time there, I felt like God was stirring something in my heart. I had no clue what it was that God was trying to call me, and I wouldn't know until later. Now keep in mind that before I even went to Passion, I started learning guitar the December before, which was completely out of the blue. It was weird, and the timing was so perfect. For a couple of months, I didn't even know what God was wanting in my life. I didn't know exactly what I know now, and it was very stressful to try and pray and figure out what God wanted me to do. For this, I had a Bible verse that I like to think and meditate on. It was Proverbs 3:5. I talked with several people about what all this meant, and pretty much every answer I got during this time was, you need to pray about it and see what God is telling you. And if you are ever in a time of transition and you don't know, or you don't think that God is going at the same speed he needs to be going, then it's very stressful and it's very annoying when people are like, well, you need to pray about it. Well, how about you give me advice? It's very stressful. Another thing that came to my mind that was something an older lady kept saying to me whenever I was in high school was, let God be God. That basically meant stop trying to figure out God's plan for your life. Stop trying to speed things along. Stop trying to take things into your own hands and let God be God. After what seemed like years, but was actually just a couple of months, I figured out that God was calling me into worship ministry. I was really excited to get started because I was behind in the game in worship leading. I didn't know anything about the tech. I didn't know anything about leading a team. I didn't know anything about leading a congregation. I just knew what the worship leaders in front of me did. So I was like, okay, what does Ian do? Okay, what does my sister do? Okay, what does this guy from Elevation do? The biggest lesson for me to learn during this time period is that I needed to give God this thing in my life. This was a huge deal for me. I was giving my whole idea of ministry to God. I was waiting for his call in my life again, and that was excruciating. Throughout this experience, I learned to trust God with my whole life. I learned to trust God with my dreams, and I learned to trust that God has whatever is best for me in his plan. I truly believe that where I am today is where God has called me to be in ministry. I've been getting experience leading worship since I felt this call, and I've loved every minute of it. I think the reason I've loved every minute of it is because I am where I'm supposed to be. I believe that God has called me to worship ministry because this is where I am most effective in building his kingdom. If I were to want anything to be heard through this, I would want you to hear that you need to let God be God. And to make sure that your ministry is where you're most effective at building his kingdom.
What was uninspiring about that? That was good. Okay, if you hurt yourself on your way up there, you still have to do it.
This dude was for the cameras.
That's cruel. All right, whenever you're ready.
Okay, so the summer after my freshman year, I was on camp teams. And camp teams was not easy for me. It was actually really hard and not fun. There were fun times, but it was just not a great experience for me, especially the first 3 or 4 weeks of camp teams. So like training week, there was a lot of drama going on, and I was like up crying until 1 a.m. a lot of nights. And so with that, I wasn't able to like spiritually or emotionally prepare for like the summer that was about to come because I was so focused on like everything that was going on. And then my first week of camp was kind of a reality check because I thought camp was going to be like this cool time and I was going to baptize like 20 people every week and everybody was going to love me and it was going to be fun. But I'm really shy at first and it's hard for me to connect with people, and then when I only have a week to connect with people, I don't connect with them until like Thursday, and then we're leaving tomorrow. So it was a kind of a big reality check for me where it was not as easy as I thought, and I also missed my family. It was my first time away from them, and I miss Grant. It was my first time away from him since we've been dating, and so it was really hard. And then after my first week, I kind of just gave up. And I was like, I'm just going to get through the summer so I can get my scholarship, and I'm just kind of going to give it as little effort as I can. And so going into week 2, that was my plan. And I was just like, I'm just going to get through this summer. And this whole time, I was like not giving anything to God. I was just kind of wallowing in my pity and just kind of focused on all of my own issues and all of my own struggles. So then, week 2 gets even harder. My niece was born that week, and usually when my nieces and nephews are born, I like go meet them in the hospital, and I couldn't do that because I was on camp teams. And also, Grant's ex-girlfriend was at that week of camp, and so like I was really struggling with comparing myself to her because she was like everybody's favorite person at that camp, and that's great and everything, but I really struggled myself with like comparing myself to her, and so I was really insecure that week. And so like I said, I was just completely unwilling to try, and I was completely unwilling to give any of these struggles over to God. I was just kind of sitting and pitying myself and just waiting for the summer to be over. So then on the first day of that second week of camp, there was a girl who was dropped off by her parents, and she was in my cabin. She was really quiet, and she very clearly did not want to be there, and her mom pulled me aside and said, hey, she's really suicidal. That's why she's here. We want to see if this will help her. And so I tried to talk to her, and she basically was like, I don't want to be here. I don't believe in God. If there was a God, I wouldn't have the life that I have. So she just was very clear, like, I don't want to be here. Don't talk to me, basically. So then later I went and found the dean, and I had only had a year of counseling classes, and there was only 2 classes in there. So I was like, I don't know what to do. And so I told the dean, and he was like, basically, we need to make sure that she's safe and everybody else around her is safe. And so he was like, just follow her around. So my job for that week was to just watch this girl and make sure that she wasn't alone. So that's what I did, but I didn't put any extra effort into it. I just watched her, basically, and I didn't go talk to her a lot. I just kind of made sure that she was with people. So then later in the week on Wednesday, weekend ends on Friday, everybody goes home Friday at noon. On Wednesday, she asked if she could call her parents and go home, and they wouldn't let her go home. So then Thursday, though, I saw that she had been hanging out with some girls. So there was some progress happening, but it was really late in the week, and none of it was because of me. It was I was literally just following her around. So then on that last night, Thursday night, we had campfire, and after campfire, this girl came up to me and asked if she could talk to me, and she pulled me aside and she said, Ronnie, this has been a really great week, and I've made a lot of friends and I plan to come back next year. And she also said, I know that there's a God, and I know that he loves me, and all of that is because of what you've done for me this week. And I don't remember a lot of what I said because I was so shocked. I had done nothing that week to really help this girl, and I was just wallowing in my self-pity, and somehow she had taken me following her around as the love of God. And so it was just a very clear moment for me where it was okay, God is using this girl to speak to me, and it's less me speaking to her and more him speaking through me to her, and more him speaking through her to me. And so what I learned is that God was powerful enough to use me even when I was completely unwilling to allow him to use me. He came in, even though I gave zero effort, I put nothing in, he was still using me. But I often look back on that week and I wonder how much more he would have used me if I had given him everything and had been putting all my struggles on him. How many more girls would have come up to me that last night and said, hey, I saw the love of God through you. Or how much more would that one girl have been able to move forward if I had been giving God my struggles. So the verse I think of is 2 Corinthians 12:9, which says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. And so God will always use people, even when we don't want him to, because he is just that powerful, and what he wants done is going to happen. But it'll be a lot easier for him if we allow him to use us.
My servant leader lesson is don't have ex-girlfriends because it just leads to issues. So I feel weird sitting down. My sophomore year, the end of my sophomore year to the beginning of this year, I preached at a really small church in a little town. It was a really great experience for me, and I loved doing it. And if you know me at all, you know that I love to preach. It's something that I'm super passionate about. And so as I was serving at this church, like every single week, it was this constant cycle of me always striving to have this stellar sermon, and preparing for sermons it almost drove me insane, in a good way and in a bad way. It was good because I was so passionate about it that I was always thinking about how do I make this week's sermon the best that it can possibly be, but it was also a bad thing because it just saturated every moment of my schedule. So anytime I had a free hour in my schedule, I was working on either studying a text or writing a sermon or rethinking how I wanted to phrase certain things. There were times where I would go to sleep, and in my sleep I would think of a line for a sermon, and then I would wake up and then write it down. And so it was like affecting my sleep patterns and everything like that. And so I felt like I was going insane because I loved to preach so much. And so it was this good thing, but it was also driving me insane to a certain extent. And I remember how obsessed I was with having this impressive performance, is what I'm going to call it. I always wanted to have this amazing ministry moment where I get up and preach a sermon on Sunday, and then I hear those of approval. You know what I mean? The Lucas Reynolds, like if you're in a preaching class, you know that he does those things where you say a good, thoughtful line, and someone's like, yeah, that impacted me. And I wanted that to happen every single week. I wanted to make an impact. I wanted to have this impressive ministry performance. Thank you. But in that congregation, there was a woman named Esther Lynn, and she sat back where Lucas is sitting in the back row of the church. And she sat through all of my impressive performances. Like, she heard me get up every single Sunday and preach a sermon, and she heard all my dominant thoughts that I like cleverly crafted to make them sound as catchy as possible. And so she sat through all of that. And then at the end of the service, I would go to the back of the church, and then as people were leaving, I would shake their hands. And when Esther Lynn would come by, she would grab my hand and shake my hand, and then she'd say, "Oh, your hands are so cold." And that's what old ladies sound like, if you didn't know. But she would shake my hand and tell me how cold my hands were, and I would kind of laugh. It was funny the first time, and then like the 90 times after that, I was like, okay, this is cool. But every single week it was the same thing, and we would share that little 5-second interaction every single week, and then she would leave, and I'd go on with my week. But eventually, Esther Lynn stopped showing up to church, and I didn't really notice, if I'm being honest, because we didn't share more than 5 seconds every week. It was just one small interaction at the back of the church every single Sunday. And so I didn't really notice, but about 6 months after she stopped showing up to church, another lady comes up to me and says, "Hey, Esther Lynn she's been moved to the nursing home right down the street. She's not doing well at all. She doesn't have much time left. They essentially moved her to this nursing home to die. And she told me that she wanted you to come visit her." And then I was like, okay. And so I was thinking two main things in that moment. One, I was thinking, all right, I've never done a nursing home visit before, so like I was pretty nervous about that. And then two, I was just thinking, I don't know who Esther Lynn is. Like, I didn't know this woman's name, and I had forgotten that she even went to the church, and so I was really concerned and freaked out about having to go do this nursing home visit for someone I didn't know at all. But Ronnie and I, we drove down there to the nursing home, and she was sitting at one of the tables in the cafeteria, and so I went and sat down across from her. And I kind of talked to her. And when I looked at her face, I recognized her. She looked a lot different, though. I could tell that she was really unhealthy, and she probably didn't have much time left. Her hair was a completely different color, and she looked really, really frail. And so I asked her if she wanted me to pray for her, and she kind of jumped on that opportunity. She thought that having the pastor pray for her was like something special that would give her peace or something. And so she grabs my hand as soon as I said, "Do you want me to pray for you?" And so I went ahead and prayed for her. But then as she's holding my hand in the middle of the table, she goes, "Your hands aren't so cold anymore." And then I kind of chuckled because I had forgotten about that little silly interaction that we had at the back of the church every single week. And that's what we ended up spending most of that visit talking about. We kept going on joking about how my hands are always so cold. And that's all she wanted to talk about. And throughout that whole visit, looking back on it now, that was the last time that I saw Esther Lynn before she died. Like, she passed away a week later, and I look back on that visit now, and the only thing that we talked about was some silly little interaction that we had at the back of the church. And she didn't say, she didn't have anything to say. She didn't want to talk about my impressive performances in ministry. She didn't care about my sermons. The only thing she said about my preaching was, "I've heard you've gotten a lot better," and I didn't know how to take that. And so when she said that, it kind of clicked in my head. This lesson that I want to share with you guys today it kind of started to make sense to me. And it's when I realized this truth that our interactions with people are more important than our impressive performances. That's one of those lines that I stayed up late cleverly crafting. But I realized that it doesn't matter what we do. Like, we all strive for those big moments. So you can preach in front of 1,000 people. You can be on stage at CIY. You can go overseas and baptize people in African rivers, and you can lead staffs at mega churches, and you can do all these things. You can say the exact right thing in a counseling session to help a couple have a breakthrough and fix their marriage. You can do all these things, but what really matters is the way that we're loving and serving people in the menial moments of life. And so the verse that I'm reminded of is 1 Corinthians 13, 1-3. Paul says, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels but don't have love, I'm just a gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and I can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains but I don't have love, it doesn't matter, I'm nothing. If I give all that I have, all that I have to the poor, or my body over to hardship that I may boast, but don't have love, I gain nothing." And so the lesson I learned is that if we want to be servant leaders who are going to make a difference in the world, we have to recognize the importance of being present in each moment and showing love to people in the small, seemingly meaningless moments of life, because the ordinary moments are generally the moments that God uses to make the most extraordinary impact.
So, first things first, I don't mention Jesus or God a whole lot in this assignment, which maybe makes me a heretic, but it was more, when I read the assignment, I took it as, well, what's a leadership lesson that I've learned? Something that I think has been super impactful to me in my leadership. And mine wasn't a very spiritual one, it was just a practical one. It's just a time that I really crashed and burned because there's something that I should have known that I didn't know. With that being said, I don't know if you guys have noticed or not, but a lot of people, when they're kind of describing themselves, will say, well, I'm kind of self-conscious, or I'm very confident, or if they say that they're humble, then they're probably not humble. That's something that they might say. I will outright admit to you that I am none of those things. I'm just kind of a cocky jerk. I've acknowledged it, I've come to terms with it. Jesus still loves me, and it's okay. But if you don't believe me, you can ask my wife. If you don't want to ask my wife, then I can give you a little illustration. I was walking with Jake Case 2-3 weeks ago, and it was right after we did that picture in the middle of the gym with all the preaching majors, and I looked around and I realized that I'm the shortest preaching major in the school, which used to be Levi. Like, Levi was like up to here, but he's not here anymore, and so I'm looking around and I'm like, man, this kind of sucks. And I was talking to Jake about it, and Jake was like teasing me and like calling me short and everything. I said, Jake, I don't care if I'm the shortest preaching major as long as I'm the best. And he was kind of like, and it was great because for a minute I was just kind of sitting there like, yeah. And then I looked up and I saw Grant come around the corner, and in the back of my head I went, I don't care if I'm the shortest, as long as I'm the second best preacher. But I've always kind of been that way. I've always been super confident. I've always kind of thought of myself as, you're a natural speaker, you're a natural leader, it's just who you are. I mean, in high school I was a captain on every single athletic team that I was on. I had a student leadership position in my youth group. I led worship at my church. I preached like 3 or 4 times before I even got to come to college. Like, they just put this kid with no training up there and said, hey, go ahead and teach our congregation for 30 minutes. And so I always saw myself as this natural leader, this natural speaker, and I'm like, I'm just good at this. It's just what I do. I don't even have to try. That's honestly how I thought about it. And so when I came to Central, I kind of kept those attitudes. My freshman year, I got involved with homeless ministry because, of course, like, you're going to a Bible college, so you have to get involved in some sort of outreach as soon as you get here. And so I got involved with homeless ministry, and I very quickly became a group leader, where, if you guys don't know how homeless ministry works, they just put you in charge of 2 or 3 other people And you're basically in charge, first of all, of their safety, and second of all, making sure they actually accomplish the mission of going out and befriending people on the streets of Columbia, making sure they're actually talking about the gospel, that sort of thing. So I very quickly became this group leader, and I was definitely looking up to our ministry leader, which at the time was Kyle Ball, who kind of ran homeless ministry like it was like a spec ops military unit. And then after he stepped down, Bill Varner took over, and Bill Varner kind of ran it like he was everyone's dad. And I really admired both of them and the way that they were kind of able to operate homeless ministry in completely different ways, but still keep it effective. Long story short, Bill had to step down, and he put me and Jeremiah in charge, so I did what I always do, and I kind of pushed Jeremiah down, and was like, no, this is my thing, like, stay out of the way. And so Jeremiah didn't really do much. He was a leader in name, but I kind of made sure that he didn't do much else, and I just kind of took over. And I tried to kind of combine that, like, precision that Kyle brought with the relationship that Bill brought, and my natural leadership ability. I ended up with a steaming pile of dysfunctional crap. I knew it was bad. The ministry just didn't operate the way that it should have. Now, I do think that I'm a decent enough speaker, and I sold the mission pretty well to the freshmen, so we had like 30 or 40 volunteers on some weeks. It was insane. But it was dysfunctional. It didn't accomplish the goal. It just didn't work. And to give you kind of an image, and I wish that Garrett was here because he could back me up on this, a typical week in homeless ministry, a typical Friday, when we were getting ready, would consist of me kind of like, walking up to his chairs that are out in the middle of Helfrey, kind of standing, hey, everyone, shut up, Garrett, I swear to God, if you open your mouth one more time, like that was kind of how it went. And that was just kind of how I ran homeless ministry because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to keep people's attention. I didn't know how to continue to sell the mission. I did it initially, which is why they showed up, but I didn't know that's something you have to continuously do. You have to keep giving them the mission, keep convincing them what we're doing is important. And so I just kind of tried to run roughshod over a bunch of adults that are tasting freedom for the first time in their lives and don't want people to tell them what to do. And it didn't work. And a lot of people quit. And over the following months, once I kind of realized, maybe I need to tone this down a little bit because whatever I'm doing, it's not working. I cannot tell you how many people I sat down with and talked to, and they said, Jason, when I met you, I really thought that you were a jerk. And now I think you're only a little bit of a jerk. And the point is, I thought that I had this natural leadership ability, and that's all I needed. I didn't need to prepare. I didn't need to do anything different. I didn't need to learn or to teach myself or to have others teach me because I thought it was just that good. In reality, no one is that good. Everyone needs some sort of training. I mean, even the apostles got 3 years with Jesus. And so I came in, had like 4 or 5 months of Bible college, and thought, I'm good, I'm ready to go. I am a natural leader, and I know everything there is to know. In reality, that's just not how it is. So over the past couple months, 2 years, or whatever it's been, I've really tried to focus on developing my leadership. It's not something we get a lot in classes, but reading a lot of books, talking to people whose leadership I admire because it's something that I need. I acknowledge that I'm no longer this sort of natural, charismatic leader that I thought that I was. It's something that I have to work on, that I have to add to, that I have to allow God to develop in me and God's people to develop in me as well. Otherwise, I'm just going to end up with these horrible, dysfunctional ministries like homeless ministry was when I was leading it. The verse I think relates best to my situation, to my servant leader's story, is Proverbs 21:31, which says, a horse is prepared for the day of battle, but victory comes from the Lord. And what does that have to do with us? Well, it says that you shouldn't be cocky because God thinks you look like a horse. Thanks. No. It's the reality that there's no reason to be prideful because victory, because success, whether it's in ministry or friendship or marriage, both of which feel like war sometimes, but whatever you're doing, victory always comes from God. So there's no reason to be prideful because if he's the one winning the battle and you're just kind of a tool in his hands, then what reason do you have to be prideful? That's something that's actually really hard for me to come to. The other thing is, even though God wins the battle, the soldier still has to armor their horse. They still have a role. There's still preparation they have to do. If a soldier goes in the battle in God's name and they have not prepared their horse, they're not wearing their armor, and they don't have a weapon, that battle is not going to turn out well for them. So in the same way, we have to prepare ourselves. We have to armor and equip ourselves, or else we aren't going to see the victory that God has planned for us. That's kind of the lesson that I learned in my leadership. My carefully crafted phrase, my summary statement, my thing that I really want you guys to take away from this is you have to learn before you can lead. Because if you try to learn after you start leading, it's too late.